Hello viewers, and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch, and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I'm going to be commentating over a pre-recorded match that I played against a user by the name of ranlam, which was played for the second round of the 4th season of Sam Mann's Warhammer 40k Conquest OCTGN WA League. Though at this point in my LCG career, I've created an enormous number of videos and interviewed innumerable tournament champions, my personal estimated total number of matches played is probably somewhere around 16. So while I frequently and often talk to experts and feel like I have a rather strong potential, I'm still missing an underlying understanding of a great many basic and fundamental elements of gameplay that would stand to make me a much more competent player than I currently stand. So, I definitely make a few mistakes and suboptimal plays during this video, and for that reason I ask that you please leave comments, constructively criticizing and making suggestions for how I could improve, because with your assistance, hopefully someday I can indeed reach the level of skill and experience required to become a truly formidable tournament player. So, if you enjoy this video and would like to see me play out and commentate more matches of my own, be sure to let me know in the comments. But in any case, let's get our video started with a match between myself as Ragnar Blackmane and ranlam as Zarathur, High Sorcerer. Alright, thank you very much for joining me today. This is going to be my second week matchup in Sam Mann's online OCTGN competitive league. I'm going to be playing Ragnar Blackmane once again, going with a very strong competitive warlord I have a little bit of a history playing. In taking a look at our planet layout, planet number 1 is Taurus, which confers a bonus based on unit count. Planum allows the relocation of non-warlord units. Iridial removes damage, Yvarn puts units into play, and of course our fifth and final planet is going to be Ossus 4, which allows to steal resources from one's opponent. I was quite taken aback to see Zarathur being my foe's chosen warlord, my foe in question being ranlam, and taking a look at my opening hand, I do not decide to take a mulligan. I feel as though this is a relatively strong start. I've got an Imperial Fist siege force to try and get rid of opposing void pirates and rogue traders. It was kind of my hope that at some point he might have multiple copies of that unit stacked on one specific planet so that I could potentially route multiple copies at once, and then I've got some formidable combat units as well. I've got 2 copies of Blackmane Sentinel, which will allow those units to be used for command and then relocated further up the board to assist me during combat. I have a copy of Tactical Squad, which could be very important in helping my opponent not get to some sort of critical unit count, and then of course it's never a bad thing to see Honored Librarian, and Primal Howl rewards me very well for showing up at the same planet as my opponent's warlord. Ranlam does actually choose to take a mulligan himself, so he substitutes all 7 of his cards for a brand new hand. He ends up being the first player, so we've got the initiative token in his hands. His first play happens to be a 2-command Chaos Fanatics to the first planet. At the present moment, this game could end as early as planet number 3, and I'm going to try to be very aggressive. I end up putting a Tactical Squad out to the first planet just because I'm going to try and punish him for deploying there. I went with the Tac Squad and not one of my other attackers just so I could try and deter him from stacking multiple units on that same planet. Something I kind of struggled with during my last game, my first match in this competitive league, was not having Ragnar go to the same planet as the enemy warlord, so I'm hoping that by being a little bit more aggressive this time, I can really try to leverage that to my advantage. And it seems as though, as I'm a new player, I ended up making a mistake, and I kind of changed my mind, ended up putting that Tactical Squad Cardenas at the second planet. I am very cognizant of unit totals, seeing as how Taurus is going to be the first planet, so I was kind of keeping in mind trying to match my opponent's number of units here. We end up seeing a rogue trader played out by him to planet number 4. I believe both Ranlam and myself are relatively inexperienced players, but that's all the more reason that I would very much encourage and appreciate any and all comments and constructive criticism regarding my play and regarding play on part of my opponent. I end up putting a Blackmane Sentinel into play at planet number 3, which is Iridial, and this gives me a lot of confidence in knowing that I can try to be as aggressive as possible, just because if Ragnar ends up taking a bunch of damage himself, that not only spares my other units from taking damage, but seeing as how ideally I'd be winning on Iridial, even if I don't happen to win there, that's still a planet that if I were to win it, I could potentially clear a ton of damage off of Ragnar. So it is currently my opponent's option to deploy. I'm just trying to figure out what kind of planet abilities I could try and use. Taurus, of course, is very straightforward. I'm going to want to try to commit as early as possible to the same planet as my opponent's Warlord, and then at the moment I'm just kind of trying to conserve resources to try and match him unit for unit, and then try to remain aware of not wanting to destroy more units than my opponent leaves me with, just because I would hate to have him trigger Taurus. I was very surprised to see that Khorne Berserker, a little unnerved by it. It's a 2/4 with Brutal. Seeing as how my opponent has the initiative token, I'm trying to figure out, can I deploy a unit to the first planet? How can I try to ensure that it has to attack before I deal it out some damage? And then I keep in mind that I've got a Crushing Blow as one of 2 events in my hand, and I'm just trying to think if there's any kind of devious way that I can destroy that. I end up putting out an Honored Librarian to planet number 1, just because that could potentially kill that Khorne Berserker in a single swing, and this very much telegraphs to my opponent that I'm going to be sending my Warlord to planet number 1 to back up that Honored Librarian, because that's my last bit of resources here. We see the signature support, the Shrine of Warp Flame, played out by the opponent, and that's as soon as he ends up destroying one of my units, he can return the topmost Tzeentch card from his discard pile to his hand, and that's going to be extraordinarily nasty, because if his Zarathur's Flamers end up destroying one of my units, he can potentially recur that back to his hand turn after turn after turn. We both set our Servo Skulls. I end up, of course, sending to planet number 1, and my opponent also ends up sending to planet number 1. So this is nice. I feel as though I'm off to a decent start, but this is going to be the first of several mistakes here, just because there are multiple reactions triggers all taking place. So be sure to let me know in the comments if you think this happens to be a mistake once I get to it, but I choose to trigger Ragnar's immediate reaction because there's the triggering event, the same planet as the opposing Warlord, so 2 damage to that Chaos Fanatics, which ends up being shielded, and of course I also trigger a Primal Howl after committing to the same planet as the opposing Warlord, so I end up pulling in 3 extra cards for free, 2 Void Pirates and 1 Promotion. And what I was hoping to do is by killing off his Chaos Fanatics, I was going to make it all the more likely that the opponent would have to attack with, say, Zarathur, and then I would attack with Ragnar, and then he would attack with his Khorne Berserker, and then my Honored Librarian could clear the Khorne Berserker, was my thought there. Note that I did not relocate my Blackmane Sentinel at planet number 3. In hindsight, I do believe that was a mistake, but be sure to let me know in the comments what your personal thoughts are. Ranlam ends up winning command on 2 different planets, and of course he personally has a copy of Rogue Trader out in play. I end up winning command on 2 different planets, so I'm only going to be pulling in 2 cards, 1 resource, whereas Ranlam himself ends up procuring 1 card and 3 resources. So for this battle at the first planet, the initiative token is in the hands of Zarathur, and quite frustratingly, I don't have much in the way of events in my hand. Not that I have a lot of resources to play them. I've got my Crushing Blow, which is 1 shield. I have Promotion, which is 1 shield. We see the Khorne Berserker open up combat, which I found to be a very curious choice. It goes and swings at Zarathur for what's going to be a total of 3, and just because of my inexperience playing this game, once again, I'll mention I've maybe played 15 or so games at this point. I kind of consistently space that Zarathur increases any and all points of damage inflicted by 1, so any assigned damage at his location to any kind of enemy unit is amplified by 1. So the Khorne Berserker, still probably not the best choice to have it attack first. At the moment, Zarathur happens to have 3 resources, 3 cards in hand. He could have something like a Infernal Gateway to drop a drop pod style effect 3 or lower cost Chaos unit into play. I take this opportunity to have my Honored Librarian take a swing at the Khorne Berserker, and we end up seeing his signature attachment, the Mark of Chaos, discarded to block 3 out of those 4 points of damage. So the Khorne Berserker ends up taking a grand total of 1, which means it'll now be attacking for 4 as long as Zarathur is at that planet. And at the moment, I'm already starting to feel a little bit of pressure just because I'm so low on shield cards in my hand. This is a 30 unit count deck. We see the Chaos Fanatics take a swing itself at Ragnar, and I'm trying to determine here, I would end up taking 2 points of damage from this attack. I would take another 2 points of damage from Zarathur's attack. That would result in my being bloodied, but I wait to use a shield card just because at the moment it's not necessary, and I don't think I have too much to worry about yet. There's no, surprise damage amplification effect. There's no Warp Storm already having been played. I take a swing with Ragnar at his Khorne Berserker. He ends up to take the damage, and I, of course, use this opportunity to use one of 2 copies of Crushing Blow in this deck. That's going to add 1 unpreventable damage on top of that, and he ends up losing that 3 resource cost Khorne Berserker. So at this point, I start to feel pretty good. Zarathur, of course, does have an opportunity to attack himself. He attacks for 1, amplified up to 2, so therefore I have to expend my copy of Promotion in order to prevent Ragnar from being bloodied. And seeing as how Iridial is going to be planet number 3, it now is going to become a priority for me to try and heal away this 6 damage points on Ragnar here. This is kind of unfortunate because I don't have any kind of event support like I was hoping to maybe win more command, maybe get some drop pod assault back up or something like that, but I kind of choose to abandon the first planet. At the end of the combat round, everybody readies. There's no actions on behalf of my opponent. He only has 2 cards left in hand, which is nice to see, so I end up retreating with Ragnar, and then I'm trying to decide whether or not I want to retreat with my Honored Librarian as well. There's a little bit of delay, as you might expect from a relatively inexperienced player such as myself. I think Ranlam mentioned he's only played the game in person 4 times. I'm not sure how many games he's played on OCTGN. I believe quite a few, but it all kind of remains to be seen. So I ultimately do decide to retreat with my Honored Librarian, of course, and both of my units are now exhausted in my headquarters, and that means that that very first battle is going to be won. I was very kind of frustrated because I knew that there was nothing I could do to stop my opponent from winning Taurus, in my opinion there. He's going to be able to get his pick between 3 cards and 3 resources. He ultimately decides to pull in 3 resources. I could have tried to keep my Honored Librarian at the planet, but seeing as how he has the initiative, there really wasn't anything I could have done. Ragnar would have been bloodied. I'd have maybe gotten a single attack in with my Honored Librarian, but he very well could have shielded it. It just seems like it would have been, it wouldn't have done me any good. So I considered leaving the Honored Librarian there just to die in order to deprive him of that opportunity to pull in 3 cards. In hindsight, that may have been a wise choice, but once again, just more fodder for you guys to comment on in the comment section below. Just because I did think about that, I didn't ultimately end up doing it. Our new 5th planet ends up being Karrnath, which I was quite pleased to see. I thought that it would probably be pretty easily telegraphed, my committing to Iridial, our current planet number 2, and I felt as though Karrnath would be a good sneaky option for me to win command there with Ragnar, hopefully entirely by surprise, and then still trigger the battle ability of Iridial to clear off that 6 points of damage. I send a Void Pirate there initially initially, but I end up changing my mind just because, and hopefully this changing my mind doesn't clearly telegraph to my opponent what my intentions were, but it seemed as though that Void Pirate would be better suited at a planet where I wasn't likely winning a command by default because of Ragnar. At the present moment, the initiative token is in my hands. It's my opponent's opportunity to deploy. I've got 4 resources left compared to his 7, and I have 7 cards compared to his 6 cards. I see a Zarathur's Flamers touch down at the first planet, and this was absolutely horrifying, because as soon as Zarathur happens to be present, this Tzeentch demon that he could easily recur each and every turn to his hand attacks for 3, it gets sacrificed for 3, and all of a sudden I'm not feeling too great about my tactical squad Cardinus sitting there. I happened to mention earlier on in this video that I frequently happen to forget or space the fact that Zarathur increases each and every instance of damage, and that Zarathur's Flamers is one unit where it has 2 opportunities to just absolutely wreck the opposition. I was initially feeling alright that my tactical squad could stomach, say, it being sacrificed since I have initiative, and then it could trigger some sort of area effect volley, but seeing as how that if Zarathur is committed to the first planet, that's just so much damage that he can dish out. It's very alarming. I was very much of the mindset that I wanted to just trash this recording while I was in the process of doing this video. I put out a Blackmane Sentinel, and I'm currently trying to figure out where I want to play it. I'm trying to decide, do I want to put it at Karrnath? I ultimately end up settling on our planet number 2. I definitely want to try to lock down Iridial. I don't want to lose a battle there, and I'm still trying to win the game as quickly as possible. We have so many strong point planets in play. The planet that Zarathur, that ranlam happened to win, that was 1 green, 1 red icon. Our current first planet has green and blue. Our next planet in line is a Tricon planet, and then the next planet in line is also a Tricon, so there's just so much out there on the board. Ranlam uses his deploy action to put out a 5-cost Gleeful Plague Beast. It's another command icon, which means he's going to be able to best me at the first planet. It attacks for 3, it swings for 5, and it deals an area effect 1 equivalent at the beginning of the combat phase, and is very important to keep in mind. That's yet another effect later on in this video where I happen to kind of forget that Zarathur happens to amplify that damage. I do ultimately take this opportunity to put out my copy of the Imperial Fist Siege Force at planet number 3. I route that Rogue Trader, so even though Zarathur could potentially win command at whatever planet he goes to and still benefit from that Rogue Trader's effect, I'm still nevertheless all the more likely to benefit from an additional command struggle victory by clearing out that Rogue Trader. At the present moment, we're trying to figure out what planets we want to deploy our Warlords to. This is yet another mistake on my part because I happen to forget about that Honored Librarian sitting in my HQ alongside my Warlord. So by picking planet number 5, I end up depositing that that Honored Librarian alongside my Warlord exhausted at the 5th planet, which is not great to see. And because I'm very, very unlikely to win this battle here at Planum, our current first planet, I'm not going to be able to relocate that Honored Librarian. So I feel this still worked out okay, sending him to the 5th planet. It certainly allows me to pull in a lot of command struggle victories, a grand total of 4 relative to my opponent's 1, so I end up pulling in 3 cards and 4 resources. Zarathur himself ends up getting 2 resources because of that Rogue Trader and a single card. He of course goes to the 1st planet, and all he has to do is destroy my single tactical squad here. So the initiative token is in my hands. Fortunately, he doesn't happen to have any ranged attackers, but in taking a look at my hand, I have absolutely no shield icons whatsoever. I've managed to draw into a ton of army units and a little bit of support, which is just kind of frustrating. No drop pods, no eager recruits, no shields whatsoever. And like I mentioned before, I think I've maybe got 3 or 4 supports in this deck, a grand total of 30 army units. He ends up discarding his copy of Zarathur's Flamers. I put 2 points of damage onto my tactical squad, and my opponent has to remind me, of course, that Zarathur happens to amplify that damage, and that was something that I'd completely forgotten. So the Shrine of Warpflame triggers, and at the present moment, because he destroyed one of my units, he gets to recur his copy of Zarathur's Flamers to his hand for subsequent replayment the following turn. And even though I've got 4 resources relative to his 2, 8 cards relative to his 7, and I'm very well set up for command, things are looking like I am just being absolutely swept, because of course combat is just being dominated by Zarathur. What is nice to see is that his Gleeful Plague Beast ends up dealing out 4 points of damage to his army. He ends up killing off his own Rogue Trader. The Plague Beast deals itself a point of damage, the Chaos Fanatics take a point of damage, and even Zarathur takes a point of damage. None of that is amplified, of course, but his units all return to his HQ, and now it's going to be of critical importance that I defend Iridial on the following turn, just because if I end up losing a battle at that planet, then that's going to be the game, because at the present moment my opponent has 1 red, 2 green, and 1 blue planet icons. I do, of course, happen to trigger a battle at Karnath. There's no abilities played out by my opponent, which I'm very, very thankful for. A Warp Storm would have very easily bloodied my Warlord at the present moment, and I just feel like at this point I'm very much completely at the mercy of Zarathur. At this point, I do trigger that battle ability. I clear 6 points of damage off of Ragnar, and my opponent happens to mention that he would have used Planum's battle ability, but he forgot about it. And of course, I decide to be a nice guy and let him, as I fully expected he would do, relocate his Gleeful Plague Beast to our soon-to-be first planet, where I've got 2 Blackmane Sentinels, which are very nicely set up for him to try to kill. So, as we see our 3rd round start, Eluith is now our 5th planet. It allows for tutoring of the top 3 cards of your deck. It's a blue planet that's worth a couple cards itself. I draw my resources, I reel in my cards, I end up finally seeing a Drop Pod Assault. I've got a lot of resources. I've got 8 and 10 cards. My opponent has 6 resources, 9 cards. The initiative is presently with him. All he needs to do at this moment is win combat at the first planet, and then that's going to effectively be the game as early as that. My hand is full of combat units. I've got things like Rattling Deadeyes. I've got a Catachan Outpost, which is great for attack value. I've also got quite a bit of capable command units, and I've got very much a command presence on the board, but it's all going to come down to, can I manage to win this first planet? Fortunately, Ragnar is very, healed to the brim. He's ready to get in there, do a bit of damage. My opponent plays out a Void Pirate at planet number 3, opposite my own, and of course I end up putting out a Catachan Outpost, so that any instance of damage that I can successfully attack my opponent, whether it's hitting his Warlord, whether it's hitting that Gleeful Plague Beast, I can amplify that damage. And seeing as how I've got some ranged Rattling Deadeyes in my hand, I'm just trying to determine how can I try to combine that with a ranged skirmish opportunity. How can I try to corral or guide my opponent into sending their Warlord where I would like him, or I suppose more realistically, based on my level of experience, how can I try to prevent my opponent from sending their Warlord to a couple specific planets, namely planet number 1 and planet number 2, just because, any battle won there by my opponent is going to result in him winning the game. Once again, I have to mention that I was very much in the dark regarding my cognizance or awareness of Zarathur amplifying damage. Of course, I know what the Warlord's ability was, but I didn't plan to accommodate that very well during this round. We see Rotten Plaguebearers put out to planet number 2, which not only matches command with my Imperial Fist siege force, but it makes me worry that if Zarathur shows up at that planet, it can, prior to the ranged skirmish round, attack for 2 due to its ability. And similarly, the Gleeful Plague Beast, though I wasn't mindful of it at the time, if Zarathur shows up to that planet, it's going to be able to do the equivalent of an area effect volley 2. I end up really thinking at this point I need to draw a ton of cards. I need as many cards as possible. I need to dig for combat tricks. I really need to dig for shield cards. So I end up putting out a copy of Tactical Squad Cardenas, just so I can try to ensure that I can win command at the second planet. That also serves as a little bit of of a deterrent for Zarathur, and that 3 hit points associated with that unit means the Rotten Plague Bearer can't outright kill it, and if my tactical squad can survive, I could either do area effect or I could just deal damage straight to Zarathur and amplify it with my outpost. I believe at this point my opponent has indeed passed, so I've kind of now got free reign, and I'm trying to decide how do I want to distribute my remaining command and combat units throughout the battlefield here. I end up putting a Void Pirate on our 5th planet, which is going to net a total of 3 cards for me, and then I end up playing a copy of Rogue Trader at planet number 3 so that I can not only best my opponent on command, so I break that tie, and then that's going to be 1 card and 3 resources for me with that 1 planet alone. I've now got 2 resources left. I know I can count on a pretty healthy influx of cards during our upcoming command phase, but I'm still a little bit torn. How do I want to ensure that my opponent cannot win the battle at that first planet? I don't have enough at this point for my Honored Librarian, and I kind of play this odd mix in my mind of semi-awareness of Zarathur amplifying that Gleeful Plague Beast's effect. So in my mind, I believe I've pretty much made my mind up that Zarathur is going to be going to planet number 2. I'm not exactly sure why in the moment I felt that way, but I believe that's how I'm kind of planning out my actions. I end up putting out another copy of Blackmane Sentinel just to serve as an additional deterrent to Zarathur showing up at the first planet, and I know I've said it many, many times, but by putting all of these 2 hit point units at the first planet, I had totally forgotten an extremely amateur mistake that as soon as Zarathur shows up at that planet, he increases that Gleeful Plague Beast explosion to 2 points of damage, and I only happen to have a single shield card in my hand, so I felt that the first planet was very well defended. I was completely floored by my opponent sending Zarathur to planet number 1, and I think this is an "oh god, what have I done" moment, because I was totally convinced that the game was about to end at this point. As you can judge by the timestamp in the video, it doesn't quite end that way, but of course my Warlord goes to planet number 2. I feel like a bit of an idiot for not getting the opportunity to trigger his ability, and I'm absolutely horrified seeing my opponent's Warlord show up. I have to remind him to exhaust his Chaos Fanatics, but he's still going to win command at the first planet. Fortunately, I'm going to be able to win command at every additional planet, and if there's anything I feel I do well in this game, it's trying to recover from this horrific start in just really trying to play the long game and take in as many cards and resources as I possibly can, just because in this one command struggle I end up pulling in 5 cards and 5 resources, and I'm absolutely overjoyed at what I pull. I get Indomitable. Ragnar's War Camp is completely worthless, but I also get Blackmane's Hunt, a Crushing Blow, my 2nd copy in the deck, my only remaining copy, and an Iron Halo. Ranlam himself only pulls in a very middling 1 card, no resources, and at the moment I've got 5 resources, 10 cards relative to his 3 resources and 8 cards. I'm still horrified that at the beginning of the combat phase, he mentions that, of course, the Gleeful Plague Beast is going to deal out 2 damage to each of my oh-so-fragile Blackmane Sentinels, but I did happen to draw into a plethora of shield cards, so I go ahead and lay out some of these onto the table. I very much struggled with trying to figure out, do I want to use that Indomitable? Do I want to use a Drop Pod Assault? Oh god, what do I want to do? But I end up using Indomitable, Blackmane's Hunt, and Iron Halo just to try to keep these units alive for as long as possible. They all have a little bit of damage on them, granted, but it's, I'm trying to do as much as I can to try to preserve their lives. At this moment, I was absolutely horrified that he might have a Warp Storm to just outright annihilate my forces, and almost as bad or worse, he ends up using his entire resources to do a Nurgling Bomb, so he targets the planet. Every non-Nurgle unit, note his Gleeful Plague Beast is a Nurgle unit, its controller has to deal it 1 damage or rout it, and of course, that damage is amplified by 2 thanks to Zarathur, and if you take a look at my hand, I sure as hell don't have a lot of shield cards left. So, feeling a little bit stuck at the moment, feeling as though things are absolutely horrible, I'm trying to determine what in the hell can I do. The initiative token and initiative during battle is in the hands of my opponent. I end up discarding my one copy of Crushing Blow to save my last Blackmane Sentinel. It only ends up taking 1 point of damage. My other two Blackmane Sentinels are, of course, outright obliterated. I don't know if my opponent has any Tzeentch cards in his discard pile or not. I don't know if he does, but this would be a good opportunity for him to do that. My opponent uses his action. He swings with his Gleeful Plague Beast to destroy my only remaining unit, but I do have an action window. I end up taking a look at the top 6 cards of my deck thanks to my 2 resource cost Drop Pod Assault, and I find a Blood Angels Veterans. I forgot to rearrange those cards at the bottom of my library, so quite strategically, I happen to frustratingly see 2 Eager Recruits, which would have just been absolutely clutch, incredibly useful cards, and I ensure that my promotions are going to be at the bottom of the deck, so those are the least valuable. I've still got 25 cards in my deck, but if I were to happen to get something like that, I want to ensure that they're absolutely gone. So it's my turn to attack. My Blood Angels Veterans takes a swing at Zarathur, and I, of course, amplify it with my Catachan Outpost. I happen to mention this via Skype to my opponent. Did not want to forget that. I know that his 3 shield card is gone. Zarathur only has 3 hit points remaining. If I attack for 5, I know that I am absolutely guaranteed to destroy him. I don't believe I've seen what Zarathur's ally is yet in this deck, but I do manage to successfully bloody his Warlord, and what I was starting to feel fantastic about is even though I'm out of shields in my hand, if he doesn't happen to have any shields, we each now have the opportunity to retreat. If he does not retreat, if he attacks me for 3, my Blood Angels Veterans only takes 2 points of damage thanks to its ability, and in return, I can attack for 3, and if he doesn't have any shield cards, then I can kill his Gleeful Plague Beast and win this planet. But I'm currently waiting. Does my opponent retreat? And yes, thank God my opponent does decide to retreat. So shockingly, at the very brink of losing the game, I managed to win the battle at this planet. My opponent is out of resources. He's got 7 cards, but he must not have any shields at all. So I do manage to capture that planet. I do not benefit from its battle ability, but I managed to prevent my opponent from winning the game, which is absolutely fantastic. And, my Blood Angels Veterans, of course, returns to the headquarters. I've managed to bloody Zarathur, which removes so much of his potency. This Rotten Plague Bearers at the second planet here has yet to use its action, and I believe my opponent has actually forgotten to trigger its ability. He certainly could have, and I just... Maybe it makes me an asshole, but I did not remind him, so maybe that makes me an asshole. But he does not trigger the action. I have initiative at the second planet. I attack for 2 with my Imperial Fist's Siege Force, and, to no one's surprise, the opponent does not have shields. Well, I suppose it was still somewhat surprising, but he does not shield it. His Rotten Plague Bearers are destroyed, and at the moment, I'm starting to feel ever so slightly better. Zarathur is no longer going to be able to use his ability to amplify that Gleeful Plague Beast's damage splash, and that's just absolutely fantastic for me, because so long as I can try to pin down these next 2 planets, I can potentially win the game. We do our headquarters phase. I've got 7 cards, 7 resources. My opponent only has 4 resources and 9 cards, and as you can clearly see on the table here, I've managed to come across quite the economic lead. I choose to play out another copy of Catachan Outpost. I want to make sure that I play out my supports prior to any of my army or command phase units, just because my opponent is much, much closer to having to pass than I am, and the, quicker I can get them to pass, the more I can just absolutely ensure that I can deprive him of each and every resource possible across all these different planets here. My opponent does happen to play a copy of Promise of Glory, so they put 2 cultist tokens into play. I wasn't thrilled that that allows him additional resources effectively, and it puts me 1 closer to having to pass. I end up putting out a copy of an Honored Librarian at current planet number 2, which is my win condition, or my opponent's win condition if he doesn't happen to win the battle at the first planet. And I'm very much convinced, I believe at this point, that I'm going to be sending Ragnar to the first planet, just because I'm absolutely, kicking myself saying I'm not going to do some stupid play. I'm not going to risk losing the game. I want to ensure that, I block my opponent wherever possible. I'm not going to try and, second guess myself or second guess my opponent. So at the present moment, I've still got 2 resources with 5 cards. My opponent still has 2 resources, 7 cards. He ends up using 2 of his resources for another frustrating Zarathur's Flamers, but what I like seeing about that card is I know I've got the initiative token, and if I send Ragnar to that planet, then if my opponent sends his warlord there, I can potentially snipe and kill that copy of Zarathur's Flamers, so it's normally frustrating as all hell, but I'm starting to feel decent about seeing that on the table. I'm trying to decide where do I want to put this copy of Rattling Deadeye. I end up putting it at the second planet so I can try to deter Zarathur from going there. I don't happen to have any shield cards in my hand, but I know that since I'm likely to be winning a lot of command this turn, I can hopefully pull in some more shield cards so that if Zarathur does go to planet number 2, I can hopefully shield against that Gleeful Plague Beast's damage splash, and then use a 5 attack shot thanks to my 2 Catachan outposts in order to take down Zarathur potentially. He ends up putting out a copy of the Rogue Trader on planet number 3 opposite my Honored Librarian, tying me for command there, and quite similar to my thoughts at planet number 2, I put out a Rattling Deadeye at the first planet, trying to make both of those locations as difficult as possible for my opponent to envision sending their warlord there. And just because both of those planets are victory conditions for him, and our next planet in line is a victory condition for me, I want to be absolutely certain that I can, lock both of those locations down. Much to my, surprise, much to my chagrin, I see a second copy of Zarathur's Flamers played out. He uses 1 resource and 1 cultist token in order to pay for that, and it touches down at the first planet as well, and now that's starting to be a big concern for me, because unless I draw into an absolute glut of shield cards, I know that my stupid little Rattling Deadeye is all but guaranteed to just be destroyed. Almost without giving it a second thought, I immediately commit my warlord to planet number 1. Of course, my opponent also happens to send their warlord to planet number 1. My Blood Angels Veterans arrives exhausted. My opponent has both of his Zarathur's Flamers there, and I end up quite wisely, in my opinion, targeting one of those Zarathur's Flamers with Ragnar's ability. And of course, since Ragnar has a reaction, the Zarathur's Flamers is an action, he doesn't have any opportunity to trigger that effect prior to, me potentially destroying it. My opponent has no resources. I have no resources. He has 5 cards in hand. I have 3 cards in hand. But my opponent must be running very, very dry indeed on shield cards, or otherwise just wanting to save his events, because there's no shield put into play. That Zarathur's Flamers is destroyed. I remind my opponent kindly that his Cultist Token and Plague Beast are both exhausted, and now we move on to determining our command struggles. I'm going to end up winning at the first planet, and the second planet we tie at the third, but I also happen to win at the fourth. So like I said before, I feel if there's anything I've done decently in this game, it's trying to reassess my victory condition and try to be a little bit flexible. I end up pulling in 4 cards and 4 resources where I've managed to successfully block my opponent, choke out my opponent at each and every planet, and he ends up pulling in nothing. So he has no resources whatsoever to fund events, whereas I have 4 resources. He has 5 cards, likely no shields, and I have 7 cards in hand. I ended up getting a Drop Pod Assault, an Indomitable, and a Frostfang. These are all very valuable cards. Very nice to see them during, what's going to be a very crucial combat here. At the present moment, our combat phase is about to start. I've got my Rattling Deadeye at the planet, and I'm trying to figure out how exactly am I going to deal with this Plague Beast's damage. Ragnar, I'm fine with taking a point of damage. The Tactical Squad takes a point of damage. he puts out damage tokens onto each of his units. I throw one onto my Blood Angels Veterans, my Imperial Fist Siege Force. For that Rattling Deadeye, I'm trying to think, is it worth saving? Is it worth trying to hold on to? I can only imagine that he's going to blow up his Flamers to try and destroy it, but do I want to force him to essentially do that? I'm just trying to make up my mind. Do I want to get rid of Indomitable Drop Pod Assault? Do I want to use Frostfang? I end up discarding Indomitable as a shield card just because at the present moment I'm not too terribly concerned about taking attacks. I know I've got Frostfang to discard should I need to do so, and I just simply decide not to bother. So at the present moment, I think I'm waiting to ask, does my opponent have any actions prior to the ranged skirmish? And the Zarathur's Flamers does choose to sacrifice itself to deal out damage to the Rattling Deadeye. I decide that's fine. I know that I've got the initiative token. My opponent triggers his support, his Shrine of Warp Flame, to recur the Zarathur's Flamers to his hand because he did manage to destroy the Rattling Deadeye there, and I will have the opportunity to attack first. I could do area effect with my tactical squad. I use my Imperial Fist Siege Force, augmented by both Catachan outposts, and I take a swing at Zarathur. I'm attacking for a grand total of 6. Zarathur already has 1 point of damage. My opponent only happens to have 2 shield cards left, if anything, so at the present moment, I know that there's absolutely nothing he can do. I wasn't sure if at some point I might end up seeing a shield or something like that, and it seems as though shockingly, my opponent ends up having his Zarathur destroyed. If he would have had initiative, he would have been able to simply use his first combat round to retreat, his first combat action to retreat. I could have destroyed his Gleeful Plague Beast, and then I'd have been set up rather well at that second planet, but at the present moment, I have managed to win through assassinating Zarathur. It seems as though I was able to just pull back from the very brink of destruction. I was, holding on to not losing the game by the absolute skin of my teeth, and then I managed to bloody Zarathur. I managed to play a little bit longer game. I managed to establish myself economically. I managed to choke out my opponent, starve my opponent, but extremely well played by Ranlam, an extremely tense game. I was absolutely shocked that I happened to win my second week match for Sam Man's online Octagon competitive WA League, so as ever, I'll just conclude this video by saying thank you very much for watching, thank you very much to Ranlam for letting me record and commentate our game, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel if you've not done so already, or if you are already subscribed, as ever, you're encouraged to share this content, as the more shares, the more views, the more likes, the more comments, all the more viral this video becomes. It reaches more viewers, more people might like seeing Conquest, they might be interested, they might buy into this game, and of course, that grows our community, and it sends the message to Fantasy Flight Games, keep supporting this product, keep putting out expansions, and just keep supporting this game we all play and love. If you'd like to get in touch with me, if you'd like me to spectate and commentate some games of your own, or you'd like to do a deck deconstruction video, anything at all, feel free to get in touch with me through Twitter or on Facebook, and of course, if at any point you feel so inclined to maybe kick me $1 or $2 on a monthly basis just to help me cover some of my file hosting and operating expenses, I'd be absolutely flattered and humbled if you were to check out my Patreon page. So, once again, thank you so much for watching, and as ever, be sure to check back in again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.